I have not witnessed such a beautiful wedding since I am in this world. Family and friends stood with the couple in the light of the evening hurrahing at the beginning of the couple's life. The flowers were distributed, the couples were kissed, vows made under the rose arch, and music and laughter continued to play. But by the time the moon rose high, the fairy tale was over, but I wasn't aware of it. Friends came overnight to drink and have fun in the large backyard of the house I purchased for both of us. I wish that I can just sleep early, however midnight was my final call to surrender. She touched my cheek gently and fake smiled before telling me to take my rest as she stays and continue entertaining the remaining guests. I sit up abruptly to find Mike, my brother, literally shaking me from the shoulder. His words were sharp, unforgiving. "Get up. You need to see this." I went to the guest room, the door to which was slightly ajar, and what I saw no husband should ever have to was laid bare. My wife was still clad in bridal wear and wrestled with my bosom buddy, Tom. Her laughter was soft but loud enough to hear. More to the disgust was the sounds of glasses touching to accompany their toasting. For a moment, I stood still. My instincts weren't to cry or shout. What was done, however, could not be undone, so instead, I pulled my phone from my pocket and silently turned on the recording feature. Control. That was what defined the strong from the weak. I looked back at Mike and felt a cord that was attached to his eyes pull and snap. I whispered. "Not yet. They tell me to let them bury themselves first." I didn't confront them that night. Confrontation in the heat of the moment is for fools who can't control their emotions. Instead, I let them celebrate their stolen moments of passion, believing they had fooled me. Little did they know, the clock had started ticking on their destruction. The next morning, I was up before anyone else. The first thing I did was retrieve the security camera footage from the house. I had installed the cameras a week before the wedding, intending to use them as part of a video montage for the guests. Ironically, they were now the first pieces of evidence in my arsenal. The clips were damning. The hallway camera caught her sneaking into Tom's room. The audio wasn't clear, but the actions spoke louder than words. I made several copies, encrypting them and storing them in different places. If they wanted to play dirty, I was prepared to outlast them. Mike walked into the kitchen as I was watching the footage, his expression dark. "So, what's the plan?" he asked, pouring himself a coffee. I didn't hesitate. "The plan," I said, "is to make sure neither of them forgets what they did for the rest of their lives." The first step was setting the stage. By the time Catherine came downstairs, wearing the same dress she had sullied the night before, I had already called her parents. The woman who only hours ago had promised herself to me looked startled when I smiled at her. The mask of deceit she wore would be ripped away soon enough. "Good morning," I said, keeping my voice even. "We're having brunch with your parents. I thought it would be a nice way to start our life together." Her smile faltered. "Brunch?" I didn't know we had plans. "Surprise," I replied. As we sat across from her parents at the table later that morning, I could feel her unease. She sipped her orange juice too quickly, avoided eye contact, and fidgeted with her napkin. I bided my time, waiting for the right moment. I waited until the server brought out the food, until everyone was relaxed and settled. Then I placed a USB drive on the table and slid it toward her father. "What's this?" her father asked, his brow furrowed. "Proof," I said. "Proof that your daughter doesn't respect marriage vows. Proof that I wasted my time, my love, and my trust." Catherine's face went pale. "John, what are you doing?" she stammered. "Sit down," I said coldly. "You owe them the truth." Her father inserted the USB drive into his laptop. The footage began to play, the screen displaying her sneaking into Tom's room. The table was silent except for the faint audio of muffled laughter and footsteps. Her mother's gasp was sharp, like a knife slicing through the air. Her father's hands clenched the edge of the table, his face turning crimson. Catherine tried to grab the laptop, but I slammed my hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "Don't you dare," I growled. "You sat there with your wedding vows still fresh on your lips and did this. They deserve to know who you really are." Tears streamed down her face as she pleaded. "John, please, this isn't what it looks like." I was drunk. It didn't mean anything. I leaned back in my chair, my expression unmoved. "If it didn't mean anything, you wouldn't have tried so hard to hide it." Her father closed the laptop, his face hard and unreadable. "Catherine, is this true?" Her silence was louder than any confession. I didn't let her stay long after that. By the time we got back to the house, I had already packed her things into 2 suitcases and left them by the door. I handed her the annulment papers without a word. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't care," I said flatly. "But you not staying here. You didn't respect this house or what it stood for. Now it's not yours anymore." Tom didn't escape my wrath either. I called him while she was loading her bags into an Uber. His voice was casual when he answered, oblivious to what I had in store. "Tom, I suggest you find a new best friend," I said, my tone like steel. "Because if I ever see you again, it won't be a conversation. It'll be something you'll regret for the rest of your life." "What are you talking about, man?" he asked, feigning ignorance. "You know exactly what I'm talking about," I snapped. "And trust me, this is only the beginning." I hung up before he could respond. There was no need to listen to his excuses. He'd find out soon enough that I was a man of my word. I didn't let the dust settle after kicking Catherine out of the house. She thought the worst was over, but she had no idea that her true reckoning was just beginning. Betrayal demands payment in full, and I intended to collect every last ounce. The first step in my plan was ensuring the world knew exactly who she was. A wedding is supposed to be a public declaration of love, so it was only fair her betrayal was equally public. That afternoon, I created a group chat. I added everyone who had attended our wedding, our friends, family, co-workers, and even a few distant relatives. I named the group a special thank you. The first message I sent was simple. "I want to thank everyone who celebrated with us yesterday. But there's something you all need to see. This isn't the ending I expected, but it's one you deserve to know." I attached the video footage at the hallway scene where Catherine sneaked into Tom's room. I added photos Mike had taken, showing her in bed with him. I made sure the timestamps were clear, so there was no room for doubt. The responses came flooding in within seconds. "What is this? Is this a joke? Oh my God, I can't believe this." One of her friends, Susan, tried to defend her. "Maybe this was taken out of context? Catherine isn't like that." I replied with the cold, undeniable truth. "She isn't like that? Watch the video again. She ruined her vows the same night she made them." The backlash against Catherine was immediate. Friends started leaving the chat, unable to stomach what they had seen. A few stayed, expressing their disgust and disbelief. Her parents were silent, but I knew they were seeing the truth unfold before their eyes. But I wasn't done yet. Public shame wasn't enough. That evening, I called Catherine's boss. She worked as a project manager in a tight-knit firm, and reputation meant everything in her field. "Mr. Hargrove," I said, keeping my tone professional, "I think it's important for you to know what kind of person represents your company." I sent him the video and photos. His response came within minutes. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention. We'll handle it." By the next morning, Catherine was out of a job. Next, I turned my attention to Tom. My so-called best friend was about to learn the cost of betrayal. I knew Tom's financial situation well. He had confided in me about his mounting debts and his reliance on his job to stay afloat. I contacted his supervisor at the real estate firm where he worked. Mr. Daniels, I think you should know that one of your employees has been using company resources for personal activities, I said, sending along evidence of Tom's hotel receipts, which he had charged to his corporate card. 2 hours later, Tom called me in a panic. "John, what the hell did you do?" he shouted into the phone. "I did what any real man would do," I replied calmly. "I made sure everyone sees you for what you are, a snake." "They fired me," he yelled. "I'm going to lose everything." "Good," I said. "That's a start." But the real masterpiece was yet to come. I took to social media, posting a single image, a picture of Catherine and Tom at the wedding, smiling during the toast. The caption read, "Here are the stars of my wedding night. While I was sleeping, they were busy breaking their vows and ruining lives. Cheers to true love, huh?" The post went viral. Hundreds of comments flooded in. Strangers chimed in, expressing outrage at their behavior. The story spread like wildfire, shared and reshared until Catherine and Tom became internet pariahs. By the end of the day, Catherine called me, her voice trembling. "John, please," she begged. "You've made your point. Can we just talk?" I didn't bother to hide my disdain. "You think this is over? You haven't even felt the worst of it yet." I hung up and blocked her number. That night, as I sat on the porch with a glass of bourbon, Mike joined me. "You're relentless," he said, shaking his head. "Damn right I am," I replied. "This isn't just for me. It's a message to every man who's been in my shoes. Don't let them walk away without consequences." Mike raised his glass. "To consequences." We drank in silence, knowing tomorrow would bring the next stage of their downfall. By now, Catherine and Tom had tasted the bitterness of public humiliation, but I wasn't done. The small cuts I'd inflicted were nothing compared to what was coming. They had betrayed me in the most intimate way possible, and for that, I would ensure their lives unraveled at every level, personal, professional, and social. The morning after the group chat debacle and my viral post, I woke up early, ready to escalate. First on my agenda, cutting off every lifeline Catherine and Tom might have hoped to cling to. Catherine had been staying at a cheap motel since I kicked her out of the house. She hadn't contacted me directly again, likely realizing how futile it was, but she had reached out to mutual friends, hoping for sympathy. What she didn't know was that those friends had already sent me screenshots of her messages. Her pleas were as pathetic as they were infuriating. "John is taking this too far. Can someone talk to him? I made a mistake, but he's ruining my life. Doesn't he know we were drunk? I don't deserve this. Mistake? Drunk?" Those excuses were as empty as her promises from the altar. That morning, I contacted the motel manager where she was staying. It wasn't hard to find, I knew the area and had a pretty good idea where she'd end up. I introduced myself as her concerned husband and explained that she was likely skipping out on payments and causing trouble. "She's got a history of damaging property and skipping bills," I said. "You might want to check her room." By the time I hung up, I knew Catherine wouldn't be welcome there for long. Next, I turned my attention to Tom. His smug face flashed in my mind, and my resolve hardened. Public humiliation wasn't enough for someone like him. He needed to lose everything he'd built, just as he had taken something irreplaceable from me. Tom worked in real estate, and I knew his boss personally, Mr. Daniels, a man who prided himself on running a clean operation. I paid him a visit that morning, walking into his office with a folder full of evidence. "John," Mr. Daniels said, standing to shake my hand. "What brings you here?" I dropped the folder on his desk. "You're going to want to see this before you make any decisions about keeping Tom on your payroll." He opened the folder, his face hardening as he flipped through the documents. Photos of Tom and Catherine, timestamps from the wedding night, and screenshots of Tom's questionable work expenses. I had even included evidence of him falsifying client documents, a little nugget I'd uncovered in his drunken texts to me months ago. "This is damning," Daniels muttered, his expression grim. "It's more than damning," I said. "It's criminal. You'll want to distance your company from him before he takes you down with him." Daniels nodded slowly. "Consider it done." By the afternoon, Tom was officially unemployed. But I wasn't finished with him yet. Tom had a significant amount of debt, a detail he had shared with me back when I considered him a friend. I contacted his creditors, posing as a concerned associate, and provided them with enough information to start closing in. Within hours, his phone was likely ringing off the hook with collection agencies demanding immediate payment. By the end of the day, both Catherine and Tom were floundering. Catherine's temporary refuge at the motel was gone, and she was forced to move back in with her parents, an outcome I had anticipated. Her father called me that evening, his tone somewhere between apologetic and desperate. "John, this has gone too far," he said. "She's my daughter, and I can't watch her suffer like this." "She's suffering?" I shot back. "Good. Maybe she'll finally understand what she's done." "Isn't there any way you can let this go?" he asked. I laughed bitterly. "You don't let something like this go, Mr. Hargrove. You bury it. And while I'm at it, I'm going to bury her and that scumbag she slept with." He hung up without another word. The pièce de résistance came that night. I hired a private investigator to dig deeper into Tom's life. If he had skeletons in his closet, I was going to drag them into the light. The investigator was efficient. Within 24 hours, he uncovered everything I needed: unpaid taxes, a DUI he had managed to hide, and a string of one-night stands with women he had met at company events. I compiled the information into a single document and sent it anonymously to every professional contact he had. His reputation, already battered, was now in complete ruins. That evening, Mike joined me again on the porch. "You've really thought of everything," he said, shaking his head in amazement. "I'm just getting started," I replied, watching the embers of my cigar glow in the dark. "By the time I'm done, they'll wish they'd never met me, or each other." Mike raised his glass, his grin sharp. "To destruction." "To justice," I corrected, clinking my glass against his. They thought the worst was over. Catherine and Tom believed they had weathered the storm, that I would tire out or lose focus. But they underestimated me. Betrayal isn't something you recover from overnight, and I wasn't going to let them walk away unscathed. When someone takes everything from you, your trust, your future, your dignity, you don't stop at taking theirs. You make sure they feel it every single day, in every corner of their lives. Isolation was my next step. I would leave them with no one to turn to, no place to hide, and no hope of escape. It started early the next morning. Catherine was still in the wind, hopping between motels, her pride too fragile to let her come crawling back to her parents. I knew where she was, of course. Finding someone who's broke and desperate isn't hard when you know the city as well as I do. The motel she was staying at wasn't much, cheap, dingy, and the kind of place where you didn't ask questions. I called the front desk and spoke to the manager, a guy who sounded like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Yeah, we've got a Catherine Hargrove checked in," he said after some convincing. "What's it to you?" I sighed, letting my voice drop to that low, steady tone that makes people listen. "She's my wife. Or was. Let's just say she's not great at paying her bills, and you might want to keep an eye on her room before she skips out on you." "Is that right?" he muttered. I could hear the suspicion growing in his voice. "She's been quiet, but I'll check it out." "Do that," I said. "And when you find what I'm talking about, you can thank me later." By noon, Catherine was out. The manager called me back to let me know she'd left in a hurry after he confronted her about some damaged property. I didn't ask for details. The point was, she no longer had even that sliver of stability. Next, I moved on to her so-called friends. Catherine always acted like she was the center of some exclusive little circle: Susan, Emily, and Lauren. They were the kind of women who loved drama as long as it didn't involve them, the type who would be happy to throw someone under the bus to protect their own reputations. I reached out to each of them individually. "Hey, Emily," I wrote, keeping my tone neutral. "I know you're close with Catherine, so I thought you should see this before you get dragged into the fallout." I attached a few choice photos, nothing too graphic, just enough to get the point across. Her reply came within minutes. "Oh my God. Is this real? I can't believe she would do this to you." "It's real," I wrote back. "I just thought her friends deserved to know who they are really dealing with." Susan and Lauren responded the same way. Within hours, Catherine's so-called inner circle was crumbling. They weren't just distancing themselves, they were spreading the story to everyone they knew. By the end of the day, Catherine was persona non grata in her own social circles. As for Tom, his downfall required a bit more finesse. He had always been a smooth talker, relying on charm and surface-level relationships to skate through life. But charm only works when people trust you, and I was about to burn that trust to the ground. The private investigator I hired dug up a goldmine, unpaid taxes, a hidden DUI, and another woman, a girlfriend Tom had been seeing on the side while playing the role of best friend at my wedding. Her name was Melanie, and she had no idea what kind of man she was dealing with. I reached out to her anonymously. "Melanie, I thought you should know the truth about Tom," I wrote. "This isn't easy to see, but you deserve better than someone who lies and cheats." I attached the evidence, photos of Tom and Catherine, timestamps from the wedding night, and even a screenshot of Tom boasting about how easy it was to fool people. Her reply was scathing. "Thank you for telling me. I'm done with him." But I wasn't done. I leaked the story to a local gossip blog that thrived on scandals. The headline read, "Wedding Night Betrayal, a Best Man and Bride Exposed." The article went viral, shared across social media with ruthless commentary. By the time Tom realized what was happening, his name was trending for all the wrong reasons. The final blow came that evening. Using the investigator's report, I contacted Tom's landlord. I let him know about the debts, the job loss, and the likelihood that Tom wouldn't be able to pay rent anytime soon. The result was an eviction notice delivered to his door within 48 hours. By the end of the day, Catherine and Tom were completely isolated. Her parents had disowned her, her friends had abandoned her, and even Tom's shallow connections had evaporated. They had no jobs, no homes, and no one to turn to. That night, Catherine called me again. Her voice was thin, barely holding back the sobs. "John, I need help. Please. I have nowhere to go." "You thought I'd save you?" I replied, my voice sharp. "After everything you've done?" "John, I'm sorry," she begged. "I made a mistake." I let the silence hang for a moment before replying. "You not sorry. You just scared. But don't worry, Catherine. This is only the beginning." I hung up, knowing full well that she was finally starting to feel the weight of what she had done. When you strip someone of their job, their friends, and even their home, most would assume that's enough. But most don't understand the kind of rage that betrayal sparks. It's a fire that doesn't die until every last remnant of the life they destroyed has been turned to ash. Catherine and Tom had taken everything from me. They'd laughed while they did it, toasting their conquest in the very house I'd bought to build a life with her. They didn't deserve to move forward as if nothing had happened. No, they needed to feel the consequences at every turn. It began with Catherine. She thought moving back into her parents' home would be a temporary fix, a safe harbor until the storm passed. But I had other plans. Her father, a proud man who valued respect and loyalty above all else, wasn't as forgiving as she likely hoped. "John, I'm asking you to stop," he'd said during our last call. "She's still our daughter. We can't just throw her to the wolves." "She's already in with the wolves, Mr. Hargrove," I replied evenly. I'm just making sure she learns what happens when you bite the wrong one. I visited their family bakery the next morning. It wasn't hard to find. Catherine had dragged me there enough times, gushing about how it was the backbone of her family. The place smelled like fresh bread and nostalgia, but I wasn't there for pleasantries. Her father stood behind the counter, his expression darkening the moment he saw me. "Haven't you done enough?" he demanded, crossing his arms. "That depends," I said, pulling out a folder and sliding it across the counter. "Do you want to keep this bakery?" He frowned, flipping open the folder to find financial records I'd pulled from public filings. Overdue loans, mounting debt, enough to bring the whole operation crashing down if the wrong person got involved. "What are you trying to say?" he asked, his voice low. "I'm saying Catherine has no business staying under your roof," I replied. "She's a liability, and you know it. Let her fend for herself before she drags you down with her." By the end of the day, Catherine was out. She didn't even bother calling me for help. I watched from a distance as she packed her car, her face pale and tight with anger. She had nowhere to go but the apartment of some college friend, a woman named Laura who'd always been too naive for her own good. Unfortunately for Catherine, I'd anticipated this. Before she even arrived, I reached out to Laura with a message. "Hi Laura, I thought you should know the truth about who you're letting stay in your home." I attached the damning evidence, photos, videos, and even the viral article that had turned Catherine and Tom into local pariahs. Laura's response was quick. "I had no idea. She's out tonight." Catherine didn't even last 24 hours. Tom, meanwhile, was clinging to his last shred of stability. After losing his job and being evicted, he'd managed to rent a rundown studio apartment on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but for someone like Tom, it was a lifeline. Naturally, I couldn't let him keep it. The private investigator I'd hired had uncovered something interesting about Tom's landlord, a history of evictions for late payments. It didn't take much convincing to paint Tom as another future headache. "I'm just letting you know, as a concerned party," I said during my call with the landlord. "Tom's already missed payments on his last place, and he's drowning in debt. You might want to protect yourself before it's too late." The landlord didn't need much more than that. By the end of the week, Tom had an eviction notice taped to his door. But it wasn't enough to leave them homeless and jobless. I wanted them to feel the weight of their actions in the one place they still clung to for comfort, each other. Using the investigators' findings, I uncovered another secret Tom had been keeping, an affair with a woman named Melanie, one that overlapped with his betrayal of me. Catherine didn't know, of course. She'd been too focused on licking her wounds to see that her partner in crime was just as treacherous as she was. I sent the evidence directly to Catherine, timing it perfectly with Tom's eviction notice. Within hours, their fragile alliance crumbled. That night, I sat on the porch with Mike, the cool evening air doing little to temper the heat of my anger. "They're eating each other alive now," Mike said, taking a long sip of his beer. "You've done enough." "Not yet," I replied, my gaze steady. "They thought they could destroy me without consequences. Now they'll learn what destruction really looks like." Mike raised his beer in a silent toast. "To justice." "To annihilation," I corrected. Catherine and Tom were barely holding on. Their lives, once full of confidence and charm, had crumbled into a pile of broken trust, unpaid bills, and desperate phone calls. But they still had one thing left, each other. They thought they could find solace in their shared misery, that their betrayal would forge some unbreakable bond. But they didn't realize I wasn't just after their lives, I was after their souls. If they thought they could rely on each other, they were about to learn what real isolation felt like. I started with Catherine. After being thrown out of Laura's apartment, she had no choice but to crawl back to Tom. She moved into his dingy studio apartment, the same one where eviction was already looming like a storm cloud. The investigator I'd hired had done his job well. He'd uncovered every dirty little secret in Tom's past, but the juiciest detail was his continued infidelity, this time with a woman named Rachel. She was younger than Catherine, more naive, and completely unaware of the scandal surrounding Tom. The trick wasn't just revealing this affair to Catherine, it was doing it in a way that would leave her doubting everything. That morning, I sent Catherine a letter. No email, no text, something tangible, deliberate, designed to strike her where it hurt. Inside the envelope was a series of photos, Tom and Rachel together at a bar, walking hand in hand down a quiet street, and finally, entering a cheap motel. The note attached was simple. "This is the man you betrayed me for." Seems loyalty isn't in his vocabulary either. By noon, Catherine was in a rage. She confronted Tom, screaming loud enough for the entire apartment complex to hear. According to the investigators' report, the argument escalated quickly. Tom, never one to take responsibility, accused Catherine of ruining his life, of dragging him down with her drama and self-pity. "You think I care about you?" he reportedly yelled. "You were just convenient." That line alone was worth every penny I'd spent on the investigator. But I wasn't done. While they were busy tearing each other apart, I reached out to Rachel. The message was carefully crafted, framed as a warning from a concerned stranger. "Rachel, I thought you deserved to know the truth about Tom. He's not the man you think he is." I attached the same evidence I'd sent Catherine, plus a few extra tidbits about his financial troubles and the ongoing scandal that had turned him into a local pariah. Her response was swift and brutal. "Thank you for telling me. I'm blocking him right now." The fallout was immediate. Catherine, already furious over the betrayal, packed her things and stormed out of Tom's apartment. Unfortunately for her, she had nowhere else to go. She ended up sleeping in her car that night, parked in a grocery store lot. Tom, meanwhile, was spiraling. With Rachel gone, Catherine out, and his eviction date closing in, he had no one left to lean on. But I wasn't finished yet. The next phase of my plan was psychological. It wasn't enough to destroy their present circumstances, I wanted them to carry the weight of their choices into the future. I hired a team to flood their social media with anonymous messages. The comments were tailored to hit where it hurt the most. For Catherine, you threw away a good man for a guy who didn't even want you. For Tom, enjoying your life as the town's biggest loser? The messages poured in day after day, a relentless reminder that they couldn't escape what they'd done. But the pièce de résistance came that evening. I created a fake dating profile for Tom, using the most unflattering photos I could find from his public accounts. The bio was scathing. Recently unemployed, evicted, and looking for someone to take care of me. Cheating experience preferred. I shared the profile in local groups, making sure it got maximum visibility. The comments were merciless. Tom became a joke, his name synonymous with failure and deceit. By the end of the week, the cracks in their already fragile alliance had turned into a chasm. Catherine tried calling me again, leaving a voicemail filled with sobs and half-hearted apologies. "John, please, I made a mistake. I know that now. Can't we just talk?" I deleted the message without listening to the rest. There was nothing left to say. Tom, on the other hand, didn't even bother reaching out. He knew better. Mike stopped by that evening, as he had every night since this began. "You're ruthless," he said, handing me a beer. "They thought I'd let this slide," I replied, my tone even. "But I'm just showing them what happens when you cross the wrong person." "You think they've learned their lesson?" he asked. I took a long sip of my drink, staring out into the dark. "Not yet. But they will." By now, Catherine and Tom were shattered, but not yet completely broken. They still clung to one final thread, a hope. Hope that things might turn around, that someone would step in and offer them salvation. They were wrong. There was no salvation coming for them, not from me, not from anyone. When someone betrays you so deeply, leaving scars that run to your very soul, mercy becomes a foreign concept. I wasn't interested in giving them a chance to rebuild. My goal was to leave them with nothing, not even the belief that they could recover. Tom was my first target. He had finally hit rock bottom, or so he thought. Evicted from his apartment, abandoned by Catherine, and publicly humiliated, he'd moved into a rundown extended-stay motel. The kind of place where the rooms smelled of mildew, and the walls were thin enough to hear every argument and regret-filled sigh from your neighbors. But even rock bottom had a basement. Through my investigator, I found out that Tom had started working odd jobs under the table to scrape together just enough money for his weekly motel fee. It was pitiful, really. The man who had once toasted me at my own wedding was now cleaning gutters and hauling trash to survive. I made a few calls to the companies he'd been working for, posing as a concerned client. "Hi, I just wanted to let you know about a guy you've hired, Tom. You might want to check his background. He's been involved in some questionable behavior." The responses were immediate. No one wants to take risks on someone with a tainted reputation. Within days, Tom was blacklisted from every odd job in town. Catherine, meanwhile, was spiraling. She'd spent the last week living out of her car, using public restrooms to wash up and scavenging for scraps to eat. Her parents had cut her off completely, thanks to the financial pressure I'd applied to their bakery, and her friends had long since abandoned her. But Catherine wasn't the kind to give up easily. She still believed she could find a way out, that she could somehow regain control of her narrative. She started posting online, crafting sob stories to try and win sympathy from strangers. "I made a mistake," one of her posts read. "But my ex-husband is destroying my life. I don't know how much more I can take." The comments were mixed, some offering support, others calling her out for her actions. But I couldn't let her control the narrative. Not even for a moment. I created a fake profile and joined the discussion. My posts were calculated, each one exposing a new piece of the truth. "She's not telling you the full story. She cheated on her husband on their wedding night. She's playing the victim, but she's the one who destroyed her own life." It didn't take long for the tide to turn against her. The same strangers she had hoped would defend her started piling on, their words sharper than any knife. "Maybe you should have thought about this before ruining your marriage," one comment read. "You're getting exactly what you deserve," said another. But the final blow came that evening. I leaked her attempts to manipulate people online to a local journalist who thrived on scandal. Within hours, an article was published. "From Bride to Beggar, at the Downfall of a Wedding Day Betrayer." The piece detailed everything: her affair, her lies, her public pleas for sympathy. The comments section was brutal, filled with strangers picking apart every aspect of her life. By the time she saw it, it was too late to do anything about it. That night, Catherine did something I'd been expecting for weeks. She showed up at Tom's motel. According to my investigator, the scene was exactly what I'd hoped for. "Do you have any idea what I've been through?" she screamed at him in the parking lot, her voice echoing off the cracked pavement. "I've lost everything because of you." "Because of me?" Tom shot back, his own frustration boiling over. "You're the one who started this. You ruined me." Their argument quickly drew the attention of other motel guests, who gathered to watch the spectacle. By the time the manager intervened, Catherine was in tears, and Tom had locked himself in his room. She ended up sleeping in her car again, parked just outside his door. I watched the footage later that night, sent to me by the investigator who had been hiding nearby with a camera. It was almost poetic. The two of them, once so smug and self-assured, now reduced to screaming at each other in a rundown motel parking lot. Mike came by again, handing me a glass of whiskey. "You've done it," he said, shaking his head in amazement. "They are done. There's no coming back from this." "Not yet," I replied, my tone cold and steady. "They still think they can survive together. Tomorrow, I'll make sure they don't even have that." Mike raised his glass in a silent toast, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. "To the end," he said. "To oblivion, I corrected. Tom and Catherine had hit what most people would call rock bottom. But I knew better. People like them didn't break easily, they clung to whatever scraps of dignity and comfort they could find, even if it meant relying on each other. That's what made their situation so satisfying to watch. It wasn't just their lives falling apart. It was the realization that the person they trusted most, the one they'd betrayed me for, was dragging them down even further. Still, I couldn't leave it there. They needed to see each other for what they truly were: liabilities, mistakes, and ultimately, enemies. Catherine had spent another sleepless night in her car, her hair unkempt, her clothes wrinkled, her spirit visibly fraying. She had parked outside Tom's motel again, hoping that proximity would somehow bring them closer. The investigator I'd hired sent me photos that morning, her sitting in the driver's seat, staring blankly at the dashboard, clutching her phone like it was a lifeline. I decided to cut that lifeline. Using an anonymous email, I sent her a message with a subject line designed to grab her attention. The truth about Tom. Inside were screenshots of text conversations he'd had with other women, along with receipts from his late-night visits to Rachel's motel room. There was even a voice recording, courtesy of my investigator, of Tom laughing with one of his drinking buddies about how easy it had been to manipulate Catherine. "He played you," I wrote. "Just like you played me. Enjoy the fallout." The reaction was immediate. Within an hour, my investigator reported that Catherine had stormed into the motel, banging on Tom's door so hard it woke up half the guests. The shouting match that followed was something straight out of a soap opera. "You used me!" Catherine screamed, her voice echoing down the hallway. "You were cheating on me the whole time, weren't you?" Tom, groggy and clearly hungover, opened the door just enough to glare at her. "Are you serious right now?" he muttered. "You're the one who ruined my life." The argument escalated quickly. Guests began peeking out from their rooms, some filming the scene with their phones. Catherine accused Tom of betrayal, and he shot back with accusations of his own, calling her a needy, pathetic mess who had dragged him down with her. By the time the motel manager intervened, Catherine was in tears, and Tom had slammed the door in her face. But I wasn't finished. While they were busy destroying what little remained of their relationship, I turned my attention to their futures, or rather, ensuring they didn't have any. Tom had been applying for jobs in nearby towns, hoping to escape the scandal that had consumed him here. I couldn't let that happen. I reached out to every employer he'd contacted, using the same strategy that had worked so well before. "Hi, I'm reaching out about Tom," I began in each call. "He's been involved in some serious misconduct, and I thought you should be aware before making any hiring decisions." I followed up with emails containing all the evidence, the photos, the articles, the fake dating profile I'd created for him. It wasn't long before every single application he'd submitted was quietly withdrawn. Meanwhile, Catherine was trying to scrape together money by selling her belongings online. She had listed everything from designer handbags to her wedding dress, hoping for a quick cash grab. It was a pathetic effort, and I knew exactly how to exploit it. Using a fake account, I messaged her about the wedding dress. "I'm very interested," I wrote. "Could we meet at location to finalize the sale?" When she arrived at the designated spot, a deserted parking lot, she found nothing but a note taped to a light post. "No one wants your lies. Keep running." The message was clear, and it hit exactly where I intended. According to my investigator, she broke down crying in the middle of the lot, clutching the dress like it was the last shred of her former life. But the pièce de résistance came that night. I sent them both anonymous messages, carefully crafted to pit them against each other. To Catherine, I wrote, "Tom's been planning to leave you this whole time. He's been talking to his ex about starting fresh without you." To Tom, I wrote, "Catherine's been telling everyone you forced her into this mess. She's planning to throw you under the bus." The timing was perfect. Both messages arrived just as they were settling in for another tense night of uneasy coexistence. The explosion was inevitable. You planning to leave me? Catherine screamed, throwing a glass at the wall. Are you serious? Tom shot back, his voice dripping with venom. You're the one spreading lies about me to everyone in town. The fight spilled out into the motel parking lot, where other guests watched with a mix of amusement and disgust. Catherine ended up sleeping in her car again, while Tom barricaded himself in his room, drowning his anger in cheap whiskey. When Mike came by the next day, I showed him the footage from the investigator. He watched in silence, shaking his head in disbelief. You've destroyed them, he said finally. There's nothing left. Not yet, I replied, my voice cold and steady. They still think they can hit the bottom and bounce back. Tomorrow, I'll show them what real despair looks like. Mike raised his coffee mug in a mock toast. To rock bottom. To annihilation, I corrected. Tom and Catherine believed they had nothing left to lose. That delusion was their only source of strength, and I planned to rip it away. They thought they had weathered the worst of my wrath, but they didn't understand one simple truth: our reckoning doesn't end until the ashes have been scattered. It was never just about revenge, it was about permanence. I wanted them to look at each other and see not a partner, not an accomplice, but the source of every ounce of suffering they'd endured. I began with Catherine. Her desperation was evident, like a drowning person grasping at debris. After weeks of sleeping in her car, begging for scraps of sympathy from people who no longer answered her calls, she had reached a fragile truce with Tom. She'd moved back into his dingy motel room, clinging to the illusion that they could survive together. What she didn't know was that Tom had been keeping secrets, dangerous ones. My investigator handed me the final piece of evidence I needed, a series of emails between Tom and an ex-girlfriend. In them, Tom expressed his regret over getting involved with Catherine, calling her dead weight and a liability I should have cut loose weeks ago. He also mentioned a plan to leave the city, quietly disappearing without her. I packaged the emails carefully, attaching a note designed to twist the knife. Catherine, you've been played again. He's leaving you behind. Just thought you should know. Catherine's reaction was exactly what I expected. According to my investigator, she confronted Tom that same night, her voice a mix of rage and despair that echoed through the motel walls. You were planning to leave me, she screamed, shoving the printed emails into his chest. Tom didn't even try to deny it. And what if I was, he spat back. You're nothing but a burden. Do you think I wanted this? Their argument escalated quickly. Guests gathered in the hallway, some filming the spectacle with their phones, while others simply watched, wide-eyed. By the time the motel manager arrived to break it up, Catherine had packed her things and stormed out, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. But I wasn't done with Tom. His recent job applications had been a desperate attempt to escape the mess he'd created, but I had already ensured he was blacklisted. Now, I was ready to cut his last lifeline. Through my investigator, I discovered that Tom owed several months of back payments on an old loan. The creditor had been lenient, allowing him to defer payments, but all it took was one phone call to change that. Hi, I'm reaching out about Thomas, last name, I said, keeping my tone polite but firm. He's been lying about his financial stability. I thought you'd want to know before extending him any further leniency. Within days, Tom's debt collectors came calling. They froze his bank account and issued a formal demand for payment. With no income and no savings, he was officially drowning. Catherine wasn't spared either. After leaving the motel, she tried reaching out to old colleagues, hoping to find work, but I had already sabotaged those bridges. Every potential employer she contacted received an anonymous message, detailing her involvement in the scandal and warning them about her unreliability. By the end of the week, both of them were completely destitute. Catherine was sleeping in her car again, while Tom had resorted to pawning his remaining possessions just to buy food. The final act was as much for me as it was for them. Using the footage my investigator had collected over the past weeks, I compiled a short video, a highlight reel of their downfall. It featured clips of their motel fights, Catherine's desperate attempts to sell her belongings, and Tom's drunken rants about how his life had fallen apart. I posted it anonymously on a popular local forum, titled, "What Happens When You Betray the Wrong Person?" The video went viral within hours. People shared it across social media, their comments a mix of disbelief and schadenfreude. This is better than a soap opera. Karma at its finest. They deserve everything they got. By the next morning, Catherine and Tom had become internet pariahs, their names forever tied to their humiliation. That night, as I sat on my porch with Mike, I finally felt the weight lift from my shoulders. "You've done it," Mike said, breaking the silence. "They are finished. There's nothing left for them to lose." I took a long sip of my drink, staring out into the dark. Good. Now I can finally move on. Mike raised his glass, his grin sharp. "To closure." "To justice," I corrected, clinking my bottle against his. And with that, I allowed myself to let go.